subscribers, and today is a continuation of our Work Smart series that we've been going through for now. This is the second month, so this is the second episode of it. And our focus today is going to be on sort of extending the learning that we went through in the first episode, which was last month. And what we're doing is we're using Microsoft Flow to access the Microsoft Graph. Right? The Graph API specifically is what we're doing. All the learnings that you're getting from this, though, really are about how do I access any RESTful API and how do I use the documentation to interpret it? How do I work with it? And really, this is about how do I become a rapid integration specialist within my realm of expertise as an IT pro. So today, our focus is actually going to be on really how do we build an application that would allow, let's say we blocked access to creating groups. The only people who can create groups are global admins or only people who create teams. And we want people to be able to come in and request a group or a team. And then we're going to have a workflow that sends that off for approval and then ultimately creates that group or team and sets that requester as the owner. Okay. But we're going to actually build off of what we did last month, so I'm going to start there, and we'll kind of go from that. So if we kind of take a look at what we did last time, we came into our Azure Active Directory environment, and once we were inside Azure AD, we actually went to app registration. If you guys recall this, came in here to all apps. You can see we created this application called Flow Graph Group List. Last week's we just accessed the graph and had it give us a list of all the groups in there. And so we created this registered application with all of its application ID and the secret and all of that. And so I used that same application and extended that on this week. So let's go look at where that application lived and what it was. So we'll go into Microsoft Flow to do that. So inside of Flow, we'll see that we had created a flow here called button initialize variable blah, blah, blah. So terrible name for it for sure, but I want to just show you guys what it did. And we'll go from there. So what we did is we had just a mobile button or a manual trigger so we could kick this off. We have three variables, an app ID, an app secret, and a tenant ID. Those all came from Azure Active Directory, the bit I just showed you when we registered the application. We then used an HTTP card here to do a GET command to the Microsoft Graph. And so under the show advanced options, you can see here where I use the tenant ID, the app ID, and the secret to actually get us authenticated into that. So we're going to take some of that information and take it a step further. Ultimately, all we did with this then was that was the get statement here actually got us a list of all the groups in our tenant ordered by display name. And then we used a parse JSON command against that body to actually kick out for us a SharePoint list and update it. Get a SharePoint list that has all of our groups and teams listed in them. Pretty cool, fairly basic, good place to start. What we're doing this week is extending upon that and making it substantially more advanced, right? So we're going to do it like a cooking show today. There's a lot more to this one, and there's no way I would have time to actually go through this at length with you in this half hour. So I'm going to go through, as far as live dealing with my syntax errors and all that. So instead, I'm going to go through showing you the application and all the details and actually call out to you things that you should be aware of and try to avoid, stuff like that, right? So this is a flow very similar to the one you just saw. At least that's how it starts, right? When a new item is created, so I have a different trigger. So we'll go check that out in a minute. I have a SharePoint list, and when an item gets added to gr_group request, that's what kicks us off. I have the same three variables being initialized. Now, here's that HTTP request. Note, it's a little bit different. This time around, we're going to use the HTTP post command rather than get. And what that allows us to do is actually take this and parse it through our JSON parser and all that great stuff like we did before. But really what we're doing here with this one is just getting an access token. Right. So last time I did, it was like I I had a single connection to the graph I needed to make. I just wanted to say, give me all the groups, and I did an authentication as part of the same URI or the same URL string, right? In this case, what I want to do is reach out, get an access token, and then be able to reuse that over and over as I reach back out to the graph, which you're going to see in a minute. So all I had to do here was put in the address logon.microsoftonline.com/tenant ID. Now, tenant ID, for any of you who are new to Flow or not familiar with it, I come over here to like variables, and tenant ID was one of the variables I initialized up above. And so when I touch that, it just puts it in here, and then the rest of that URL is /auth2/token. Now I need to do some things like set the content type, right, which I've done here. And then at the bottom, there is the rest of that URL, right? That post URL, which is grant type equals client_credentials and client ID equals, and then I use the app ID, the variable that I set based on the enterprise application registration that I did in the Azure portal. And then finally, client secret equals app secret, same thing. That's the one, if you remember, when you first create your application and ask for the key, you have to copy and paste it right then because you can never get it back out of Azure again. You would have to regen that key and create a new one, which would invalidate anywhere else that you would use that. And then finally, resource equals, and this is the graph, right? What URL am I destined for? And so that's the graph itself. So that's my HTTP command. I've added some comments here from time to time into these just to kind of help you guys with what it is that I'm doing. From there, I actually get a JSON output from that. So JSON, if you're not familiar, it's like XML, right? It's formatted text in a very special format. The issue that I have with this, the data that comes back is I can't just access some variable, which in this case, I want just the access token. Right? I don't want everything. I want just that access token. And so when I run it through this JSON parser, that then gives me a whole new set of things. In particular, when I come down here a little bit later, we'll come to this, but when I hit one of these where I want to access the graph again, I now have access token here, right? So this is the same thing you saw before, but as I come further down in my flow, I have more dynamic data. So if you note variables at the top, those are the variables I set. Start an approval. These are all of the fields that came from where I start the approval process. We'll get to in a minute. So if I come down to parse JSON, oh, that's when I parse that JSON up above, and there's access token. So it can pull it straight out of that. And so you need to do that because each time your application runs, it'll get a different token. So hopefully that's helpful in understanding what's going on inside of here. I need to figure out the magic anytime I'm in a meeting that nobody can pop in, but unfortunately I let guys like Micah through, so hopefully he doesn't say anything inappropriate while I'm recording. Just kidding. Okay, so hopefully that made some sense for you guys in general, right? So what we're doing different here, just to repeat that, is we are using an HTTP post rather than an HTTP GET. That's allowing me to then store that access token in what is a dynamic variable essentially, and I can access it later. So I don't have to re-authenticate every single time. Much better, right? The way an application should work. Now, the next step I have here is to start an approval. So when somebody enters an item into my form, it triggers this thing, and then I send off to the approver an email with a whole bunch of information in it, right? So item link description is here. This is the item link itself. So the way this works is the URL that's in this item link field is automatically applied as an href to all the text that's in the item link description. So you'll note here, I have this probably all ought to actually be somewhere else, but my link description is the name of the group that they want to create with the following description, right? And there's the description in quotes and justification in quotes as well. That all shows up. I did that because it kind of highlights that section a little bit in the email. It's not as pretty as it could be. You can put these fields wherever you want, right? It filled all this out for me by default when I used the template right from SharePoint to create this initial workflow. So I just added in description and justification. You say, well, that's great, Preston, but where did you add it in from? So again, when I'm inside of here, anywhere in one of these fields, I can come over here and I can actually see when new item is created. Remember, that was the thing that kicked this whole thing off, which means I can see by the icon that's a SharePoint list, right? It's SharePoint. So I can say, okay, what am I looking for? Well, I'm looking for the field called justification. By the way, I put descriptions in my field names when I create them, even just for my POCs and demos, so that I'm not confused. I know exactly what that field is, and that is the field I wanted it to be. Trust me, you'll create some pretty generically named fields and then be in here looking like an idiot sometime going, ooh, what was that field called? As a matter of fact, if you watched last month's video, I probably did that 2 or 3 times. I'm learning, right? Don't make the mistakes I made. That's why I tell you these things. All right, so then we get to the condition. The condition is really simple. It's a simple if this, then that, right? And so if the response is equal to approve, then go down the yes channel. Otherwise, go down the no channel, right? If it's a no channel, I'm going to send an email out to the originator just telling it's been rejected, and I'll include in there comments as to why it's been rejected. On the yes side of things, I'm going to do a whole lot more, and I'm going to come back to that in just a minute, right? This is where we're going to take a bit of a break and switch back over to, okay, Preston, up here, you said this whole thing kicked off when somebody created a new item. A new item in what? How did we get this far? Okay, remember, everything up here was pretty much a rehash of what we did last month on this call, just changed to post and all that type of stuff. So when we come over here and take a look at, say, SharePoint, what we'll find is that I have an existing team called IT department, and that team has a SharePoint site associated with it. I simply came into here and created a list, which you'll see populate in just a second, called GR group request. I could have done this with forms, right? And had every time somebody fills out a form and hits submit, that could be my trigger if I wanted to use Microsoft Forms. In my case, I'm building on a bigger project, and Forms is not robust enough for what I want to do. So let me explain that for a second. When I go into Forms and use it for people to submit things, that's great. As long as all I want them to do is input raw data and then I can act upon it, that's wonderful. Eventually, what I would like to be able to do is to give people choices based on dynamic data, right? I want to build a more robust application. And so ultimately what I'm going to do is utilize something called Power Apps to help me do that. So believe it or not, starting from SharePoint is the best way to build something like that. I have a simple list here, and when I click new, I get this wonderful form here I can fill out. Just by clicking the customize button, I immediately launch into Power Apps and can customize this form. I can also take this link and give it to anyone, like my good friend over here, Alf, whatever Al's last name is, Al Franklin, I think, or Fredrickson. Al Fredrickson over here. And so Al can take this URL, put it in. He doesn't have to look at the whole ugly list. Al just simply sees my form that I want him to fill out. Now, this isn't the end of my application, but this is a good POC, right? My POC doesn't have to be super polished. I just need to be able to do something. So I have Al fill this thing out, right? And I won't hit submit, but I'm going to go ahead and fill it in. So we're going to say, okay, Al, what do you want the title of your group to be? And so we're going to go with the title here to be, we'll say 10th grade science, right? And we'll say description is this is a team for all students and teachers in the 10th grade at Middleton High School, right? And then justification, whatever they might put in, I'll say collaboration. Right? They could put in whatever they wanted to. I'm not going to hit submit. I want you guys to sort of understand this is what Al's going to do. And in just a minute, Al's going to hit submit when I finish explaining to you how the flow works. But now you can see this all came from a SharePoint list. That list doesn't necessarily have to be exposed to individuals. I can get it to them in any number of ways, including Power Apps or just a native SharePoint form, which can be customized, right? I could change the background color, add images just to a SharePoint form without building a full-on application. In this case, we're going to come back over and dive back into, very specifically, the flow again to finish walking you guys through it. If I can find where I have it, there we go. So on the yes channel of this flow, what we see here is the first thing we're going to do is we need to create a group. So you'll notice I did not have to do that HTTP thing because I don't need the graph API to create a group. I can do that through the native Azure AD connector that's in here. So rule of thumb, right? If there's a native connector, you should use that before you use the REST API. Say that again. If there's a native connector for the application you wish to utilize, Microsoft or third party, use that before you use the HTTP card with the REST API. Why is that, Preston? Well, because the stuff I'm teaching you with the REST API is actually about the most sophisticated, difficult thing you can do in Flow. I quite intentionally started with the hardest part first. Everything else is easy if you figure that out, and you can accomplish nearly anything with the Graph API. But just like the advice I give you in Office 365, if there's a drop-down list or a checkbox, meaning there's a policy you can configure in the GUI, use that first. If all else fails, use things like Exchange transport rules, Mailflow rules, or PowerShell scripts, or Graph API. Whenever possible, use the native checkboxes and drop downs, the policies. If you can't do that, come to Flow, see if there's a connector. If you can use that, great. If you can't do that, fall back to the graph, right? This is kind of a, how do I make my life as easy as possible? This is how you make your life as easy as possible. This also makes it so it's easy for you mentally to roll back out of some of these automations. So I might create an automation today that becomes irrelevant in 12 to 18 months because it's now part of a product set. And so it makes sense. Oh, if I'm going to configure this policy, I want to go roll back that flow I built to do it, right? Hopefully that helps. So in this case, I'm using the Azure AD connector natively and simply going to create a new group based on the title. Notice the little SharePoint icon next to title. As we look down here, that comes from this when a new item is created. So the thing that triggered it, this is the title that we just saw our good friend Al Fredrickson actually type in. So you see it right here in the dynamic list, right there at the bottom. Same thing, description comes from this same list. Now notice comments is a little bit different. What is comments? Well, what I did, this is not the best solution. This works great for this POC because I'm the IT pro. I know what I built this to do. So when you send that email out, the approver email up above, which is actually right here, start an approval, one of the things that happens is you get to approve or reject. And when you do that, it gives you a text field to enter an explanation or a comment. Why did I approve it? Why did I reject it? In my case, if it's approved, what I'm using that approver field or that comments field for is to enter the actual name of the group. So notice I'm letting them use their display name, the one they picked, but I'm choosing what the actual group name is. All that naming collision concern you guys have given me for years and all of that, this is just an easy way to overcome it in your POC, is to just use that comments. And when you click approve, you actually type in what do you want the group name to be, which you'll see happen in real time here in about 5 minutes. And then once we have that group created, we then drop down here to get user. So what I'm doing is saying, okay, I need more detail about the user who created this. In more specifically, when I look here in this SharePoint list here where it says new item was created, the SharePoint list dynamic content, I have all kinds of stuff about created by, which I can search here, by the way. If I just go, oh, I want to see what I need is the user ID, so the GUID that represents that unique user in Azure Active Directory. So that's what I need to see. And so if that's called created by ID, that's not here. But I have to have it. But it's not here. But I have to have it, right? Are you with me? Those kind of things you run into. So how do I get that? Well, I run a get user and I use the created by email as the UPN of that user, right? I could use other things too. But now that I have that, I can actually now reference from that get user. When I come down in the future, I'll be able to reference that ID, and you'll see in a minute. Now, I ran into a problem, and this cost me a lot of time last night, which is it takes too long for this group to get created in Azure Active Directory. If you simply run forward with trying to add the team service to that group, and then add a requester as the owner and add the requester as a member, it will fail because the actual group hasn't been created yet. So you have to give it a buffer. Now it would be better in a live production environment to have a like a do until loop that says do essentially pause for 1 second until does exist. I haven't even looked into doing that here because I just needed a proof of concept for you guys, and we'll continue to build a more robust solution over time. But what ends up happening here is I pause for 60 seconds and then I simply add the Teams service to that group. Now, how do I do that? I do that through the Graph API, and I do that by issuing a simple URL, graph.microsoft.com. I pick my endpoint, if you remember from last month, beta versus version 1.0. Soon there'll be another GA version, but I pick my endpoint, and then the real key here is this groups, and then the actual group ID and teams. Now, where does that group ID come from? Notice that icon, and that icon is the Azure Active Directory icon, right? Remember where I did this create group? So what I need to do is in my dynamic content over here, I come find the create group, I click see more, and there I can see all the dynamic data that I got from it, including the ID of the group I just created. So I simply inserted that ID as dynamic content. Now here's that access token I talked about before, and this is a vital, right? I put in authorization, and then I always have to put the word bearer because that's the type of token we're working with. And then I pull that access token from that parse JSON up above, right? Access token right here. When I parse the JSON from the HTTP post in the first section. And then I have to declare a content type, which is JSON. That's pretty much always going to be the case when you're working with the Graph API. In this case, I don't need to pass anything as the body. So I just have open and close curly brackets so that I don't get any errors. My next one is to add requester as owner. Same basic thing, right? It's groups, ID, owner, $reference. That says, if I had just put owners, that would give me a list of all the owners. When I put that / $reference, that says, based on the content that's in the body of this HTTP post, you need to set that user, the user that's being referenced, as the owner. So that's what this is down here. The way I reference a user in the graph is I pick my endpoint, right, through the version 1, and then I say users and the user ID. Now notice this looks just like the ID up above for the group, but it is not. This ID, it's very important, right, that I come over here and understand I want the ID not from this first one, get group, but get user. The icons are the same because they're both Azure AD, so don't let that fool you, right? So instead, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to scroll down until I get to the header that shows me get user. I could have also come up here and typed in ID, and it would show me just the ID fields, right? Eliminating all the rest of those, and I can get right to group user ID and put that in there. Learn to use that search as a filter. It's not really a search, it's a filter, right? So that should work very well for you. Now, how that's even working, I don't know. If it fails, I'll come back and correct it. I had the weirdest time last night with this, so I also have to set them as a member. For some reason, it doesn't show it right now, but I had to put 2 @ symbols in here to get this to save, not one. So you have to escape that @ symbol with another @ symbol. Now, I'll stick around in after hours if somebody wants to look at the documentation. How did I learn how to format these RESTful API requests? That's all in the REST API documentation specifically, but I'll be happy to show you guys how I found that and how I interpret it if that's beneficial. Okay, and then the next piece that's here is finally just inform the creator. Tell them, hey, good job, you got it, it's been created, and here's the group. Right? So we created a group, we added teams, we set them as a owner and as a member, which is the right way to do it. And now I'm going to actually demo this from beginning to end for you guys. So I'll actually do a quick check of it, no errors or warnings. So remember, if you put in the @OData ID, you have to put in the 2 @ symbols to save it. It won't even let you save without that. Once you've done it, until you make any changes, you don't have to apparently see that. So just letting you guys know. Okay, so I'm going to go back just a little bit here so you can see this happen live, and we are going to just simply hit submit here on all the data we typed in. This is our buddy Al Fredrickson hitting save, right? He now just submitted that to the list. We come over here and we'll actually see shortly that this gentleman is going to get an email, which in this case is Preston Demo, and we'll see here in our flow that if we refresh and come back, that flow should now be running. So you can see it running right now. When I come into that flow, you'll see it happening in real time. I just heard the bells going off saying I have an email. So it went through, did all the top steps, and got to start approval. And you can see it's kind of hung up there. That's because it's on pause until the approver actually completes it. So I come over here to my email and hope it renders properly. That's a new one on me. There we go. So you can see here, it's giving me all the details I need, the date, who actually submitted it, when, Al Fredrickson, and then 10th grade science was with the following description, right, and justification. So it puts all that right there in the email. If I wanted to look at it in more detail, for instance, that's actually a URL that will take me right to that SharePoint list so I can go and look at it, right? I see that one item come right up for me with all of its glory. If there were other fields and things, I could look at them. Now, in this case, what I'm going to do is approve it. And this is where, for instead of reason, I'm going to put in, well, let's see, you said this was for middle high school or Middleton High School. I'm going to do MHS underscore, and we'll do science 10, right? So it's science 10, MHS. There we go. Perfect. So I'll hit submit. And so now when we go back to our flow, we'll actually see, look, it just lit up, went to the conditional statements, it created the group, it went out and fetched the user details, and now it's pausing, taking a breath. It's waiting for that to get created. So while that's being created, if I switch over here into somewhere, I have my Azure, there we go. So if I come back to Azure Active Directory and go to groups, you'll actually see that 10th grade science just appeared right here. That's brand new. I should have shown you before, it wasn't there, but it is there right now. And if we go look at it, we'll see that it has one owner, currently me, because this flow is running under my context. You would run it under a different context than yourself. You could also remove yourself as the owner. But if we come back to that flow, we'll see we're about to finish up. Our 60 seconds is almost up. 52, 57. Good. Now it's going to run, and you'll see now it's going to add teams to that group for us, and it says it ran successfully. So now it added a team service. We've got the requester as owner, all that. So let's go back over here, and we'll do a quick refresh on this group. And now when we load that up, we should now see that we have a new member. It'll come here in just a second. Takes it a minute to write it. But soon enough, we'll see Al as, there you go. Now you can see him as an owner. And in just a moment, you'll be able to see him. There you go. Now he's a member. So you just saw that happen in real time. And the final step of proving this all out is to go to Teams. As Mr. Fredrickson here, we'll say use web app. We're going to load up Teams here in our web browser. And we'll see down at the very bottom, there it is, boys and girls, 10th grade science, all created by somebody filling out a form. Full-on request. I could do multiple requesters. You'll see I'm working on one where I have a different list. That's the list of requesters. So as the requesters change, nobody has to put in a change request to IT. We just update the list, right? Update the table, and the requesters get changed out. So we'll also bring in maybe some Power Apps next time around. Anyway, thank you guys for joining me. This has been super exciting. I hope you've enjoyed our little series here so far on WorkSmart, and you feel like you're ready to start working on your own project so you too can become a rapid integration specialist for your institution. Thanks, guys. I'll stop the recording now. And stick around for any questions that you guys have. You're welcome to come off mute, ask whatever, drop stuff in the IM window. I hope this was helpful.